Okay, so the first question I wanted to ask you is it seems to me after watching The Ranger and The Sacrifice Game, the theme of self-possession and that kind of like moment of teenage girls entering adulthood, that moment of going from childhood to adulthood and kind of coming into themselves seems like something that is a consistent sort of like nexus of both pieces. And I was really interested in that, the idea that this like shift or transformation of coming into oneself felt like this driving force behind both movies. Is that something that you think about? Am I kind of on the right track there?
100%. And I mean, I think it stems from the fact that I was a very lonely teenager. And in my art, I think I like to like play with horror subgenres and think about how I can take my influences, my cinematic influences, and explore them in new ways. But I also like to pair that with my own preteen trauma of being a lonely, 12-year-old. And my parents moved towns when I was 12, and I had to make all new friends. And it was this moment in my life that was very traumatizing for me. And I think it really um like changed the way that I saw the world. I think I was operating on one level. I had all my friends, I had my hometown, I knew what was up. And then when my parents moved me to this other town, suddenly everything was new, and it was quite a shock. Um and so I think, you know, into adulthood, I'm still wrestling with this thing that happened when I was 12. But certainly, uh you know going from being a lonely teenager who cared about fitting in, and then with horror movies and with punk rock, ultimately discovering my own identity as a teenager and discovering what was important to me. There was that moment, probably not till I was like 17 or 18, where I was like, oh, I don't care, like I'm going to follow my gut and do what feels right. So I do think that I am constantly exploring that that moment, that shift, uh through this work.
Yeah, I relate very deeply to being that teenager. And for me, like horror was definitely one of the things that kind of got me out of it. And it sounds like it was for you too.
Yeah, for me, like, I was watching all these it was like late 90s uh teen slasher craze, like Scream, and I Know You Did Last Summer, and Urban Legend. And then that ultimately led me to discover horror and slashers of the 70s and 80s. And I was watching the final girls in these movies, and I was like, if that girl can, like, take on the killer and survive, I can go back to school. I can like make it through another day of school. So it gave me like hope, those
Yeah,
movies.
totally. For me, okay, so I read that you were into Buffy when you were a teenager. Okay,
Yes.
so me too.
It was a gateway drug.
Me
Yes.
too. I mean, Joss Whedon notwithstanding, but like for me, I mean, that idea of like kind of psyching yourself up and believing like I can make it through another day, that's what Buffy was for me. Like it gave me that
A
feeling of like I can conquer this monster one more day. I can do it.
100%. It's so funny. I was talking with some friends yesterday about The Craft,
Mhm.
and I had a realization about myself, which is I saw The Craft when I was like 10 years old, and then I saw Buffy probably when I was like 11. And then when I was 12, I moved towns, and I realized in both of those, in The Craft and in Buffy, like it's like a new girl in school, and then there's a supernatural thing that happens. In The Craft, it's like witches. She becomes part of a witch coven, and in Buffy, obviously, she's a vampire slayer. And I moved towns when I was 12, and I feel like I was waiting for my supernatural things to happen, and it never happened. And it was so sad and so depressing. And I think back to that like 13-year-old kid that was just like, what's my special thing? What special thing is going to happen for me? And I guess eventually, it just took a longer time for me to discover my love of horror, my love of filmmaking, and the things that I was passionate about. But it was like, it was really sad that like I really felt something magical was going to happen, and then it didn't.
Yeah, like when is my letter from Hogwarts coming? When am I gonna be a
Yeah.
Slayer? Like you guys are ready. Like what's going what's the hold up?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm waiting for my watcher. Tell me
Yes,
I'm a Slayer.
totally. Yeah, they kind
And
of
it
set us
speaks
up.
to that time. It speaks to that time of being like 12 years old when, reality and fantasy are intertwine, and things aren't super clear cut. So that is a time I really love exploring.
And do you feel like when at that time, were you kind of one of the only people who was watching horror, or was that kind of common among the kids at your school? Like, because for me, I felt like it was kind of like a little superpower that I like wasn't afraid of scary movies and like had this weird kind of like life of this weird movie kind of genre that nobody else was watching.
Yeah, I felt that way completely. And whether or not it's true, I don't know, maybe, I know so many people who have had this similar experience that I have to believe at that time the other kids in my school were also having this kind of experience. But I felt that this genre was speaking to me in the way it was speaking to nobody else, and that this was like my special genre.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's something that like makes horror very specifically like self-directed. Like it feels like it's for you and you only. Um I don't know. When I was watching Buffy, I felt like I was their fourth friend, Like
It's also like playing on your very specific fears,
yeah.
the horror genre, like your deepest fears. I mean, there's things that I watch, like Final Destination, for instance, watching the Final Destination movies. There's things I do now as an adult, and I'm like, why do I do this? Why, when I'm walking down the street, why do I look at the fire escape and walk around? Oh, it's because it's Final Destination. It's like you see these things, especially when you're like 10 years old, you see these things, and then they seed into your brain and stick with you, and adjust the way you live your life when you're older.
Oh yes. I mean, every single time I'm on the freeway and there's like a logging truck, I'm like, I'm changing lanes.
uh, you got to get around that. And I
Yeah.
also realized, because I rewatched The Craft 2 days ago, I also realized I have a total fear of bugs. Like I hate bugs. I hate them so much. And I realized that it's from watching that movie and the bug scene where there's bugs all over and snakes and stuff. I was like, it comes from that. That is what, now I'm scared of it because of that scene.
Yeah. It gave us our identity and all of our paranoias. It's great.
Yeah. But we know, I think horror fans know, um we might be a little paranoid, but we're aware of the greater dangers out there.
Yeah.
And personally, I'd rather be aware of the greater dangers and looking out for them than blindly walking into them.
Yeah. I feel like we've got that sixth sense. We're ready. Like when the apocalypse comes, beat me. We're good to go.
Yes, exactly.
Um, so I also want to talk with you about I mean, the overt feminism of your work because um something that's kind of very clearly the text of both of your features is that um women gain power through the course of the narrative. Like both the Ranger and the Sacrifice game start with men like dominating the space and being the people in control of the situation. And then through the course of the film, women kind of come into their own, like we were just discussing, and discover their own power. So when you're envisioning a project or beginning to write a script, does the idea of girls or women coming into power, is that something that you think about when you start your work, or is it something that just kind of naturally bleeds into the narrative?
Yeah, it's something that naturally leads into the narrative. I like thinking about complicated female characters, and I like to give them something like that they're internally struggling with, um, or trying to achieve. So, with Chelsea in The Ranger, she's struggling with this, like, well, she's struggling with a lot of things, but one of the things is like this weird moment that happened in her past that she can't fully remember, but it's haunting her. And also that movie is about your like toxic friend circles, these people who are your chosen family, but what happens when when that chosen family turns toxic. um and actually, I think about toxic family dynamics a lot, because also in Sacrifice Game, the gang is kind of a toxic family, and then Sacrifice Game is also about finding family in your friends too. But then in terms of the female power element, uh and the things that the characters are struggling with. In Sacrifice Game as well, like I wanted to give, they all have their own their own internal struggle. um it's subtle, but for Rose, I wanted it to feel like she's stuck in this relationship she's not sure about, and she's stuck in this place she's not sure if she wants to be there or not, if she wants to leave. Is this really the right future for her? And then certainly Samantha and Clara both have the things that they're struggling with as well.
Yeah, and that's that relationship to being trapped, and like the location of your movies is so specific. These women pushing against the constraints of kind of their location in the world feels like it gives their characters an added dimension of complexity, like place is a character in the films as well.
Yeah, I think I just really enjoy thinking um about location as character.
Mhm.
And I love diving into the aesthetic worlds of like the location. And so for and a lot of it, some of it is also just functional as well. So with The Ranger, I wanted to combine punk movies with like a Smokey Bear aesthetic, and see what happens when you have 80s neon punk and Smokey Bear woodland like clash. And then Sacrifice Game, is more hippie gone wrong culture, Manson-esque, clashing with this like pristine dollhouse of a boarding school during Christmas. Um, and also it's partly, I mentioned functional, because these are period pieces. The Rangers 80s and Sacrifice Game is 70s. And when you have a location that's like the woods for the Ranger, the location is the woods. So how do you create 80s in the woods? It's all costumes and it's all props. And same thing with Sacrifice Game. We have this we had this giant, incredible school. Used to be a monastery. It's called Oka Abbey. It's located outside Montreal. And the school, I mean, the building itself was built in like the 1800s. So if you have a structure like that, then you can embrace the 70s through costumes and props and set design. And with the Sacrifice Game, it was really fun because there is a timeless element to it with one of our characters, who goes beyond the time of the 70s. but beyond that moment. So it was really fun to think about like the layers of time in that location. So when I was talking with the production designer and with our prop master and everything, and we were talking about, you know, what the inside of that school should look like, everything, we don't want to just, you know, show things from 1971. We wanted to show the accumulation of stuff
Mm.
since the founding of the school up to the point in time that the movie takes place. And same thing with the costumes. Um, you know, the gang has been on the road, and I wanted to feel like they've been like gathering stuff, like the clothes they're wearing are things they've accumulated. And you know, some of the girls at the school, specifically Clara, maybe has accumulated clothes that were left behind from other students. And so that's always really interesting to me, like what uh the the materials that that were there before, and how they're used in the moment of the movie.
Yeah, yeah. There's a certain richness to the work that feels like it extends beyond itself. I mean, um, I think that's in large part due to the fact that you just have this like encyclopedic knowledge of horror movies. Like you're very well versed in the genre. And
Thank you.
I think that like that kind of understanding of context and that placement within context in a very knowledgeable and intentional way gives the films like a certain kind of grounding that I think um a lot of horror movies lack right now. And I was wondering, you know, it's so clear watching your movies that you love horror and that you're so well versed in, you know, every aspect of it. And you're paying homage to slashers in The Ranger, and you're playing homage to Christmas and holiday movies and the Sacrifice Game. So I was thinking, what's your relationship to horror tropes? Because, you know, we all know there's some really like fucked up things about horror and like the deep rooted misogyny and things that you don't want to reproduce. But then there's also this deep love of the genre that informs your work. So, how do you feel about horror tropes? Like, is it something that you think about when you're working?
Yeah, I think the most satisfying thing is when you, as an artist, personally, is when I have figured out how to take a horror trope and twist it and do something new with it. For me as a writer and as a director, like when I feel like I've nailed that, like it just makes my brain feel so good. It's like, I love that feeling. Uh, you know, people make movies for different reasons, but that's something that is always on my mind. And I think it is because I have been watching these movies since I was 10 years old, and then I've been working professionally in the horror industry, so to speak, since I was 22. I Right after college, I started working for a company called FearNet, which was a horror TV channel, and I started working in their marketing department. So right out of college, I discovered horror as an industry, and I knew that I just wanted to work in this forever. I was like, what? I can like work in my favorite genre. It's a real job. That's incredible. So at this point I feel like it is very, it's just something I naturally think about. Like I can't help but go through my library, the library in my brain of moments and tropes. But I think what's important is that we don't rest in those tropes, and we keep finding ways to push them and twist them and have them reflect the world that we're living in now, because the world is always changing. And what's more exciting than discovering how you can take stories that have been told forever and look at, and how we can look at them in a new light. I think that's the most fun thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just comes through in your work so actively, which is why I love it so much. I mean, I think that this like reanalysis, you have this like really magical ability to pay homage and kind of produce a critique that land together in a really kind of effortless way. That
Thank you.
subversion is not like overdone, and it's not overworked. It just you believe it, and then afterwards you think about the ways in which it shifted the narrative structures that it was birthed out of. So I think that's one of the real gems behind your work. And it's so exciting to see that repeated in the Sacrifice Game, because I saw it in the Ranger, and then seeing it as like an active thing that you do in your movies is really incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate
Um, okay, so when did you decide to become a director?
I wanted to be a director since I was probably a teenager, since I like started to discover what filmmaking was, what the process was. Uh, I remember I had a friend who said she wanted to we were 15 and she's like, I want to be a fashion designer. And then in that moment, I was like, well, I want to be a filmmaker. And it just came to me in that moment. Like I had a response right away. And that was probably the first time I like actively said it out loud. But you know, it took me a while. I felt that I really had to learn all aspects of filmmaking before I was ready to be a director. So which is not necessarily the right path. I love it when, you know, people are making movies in film school and then they're able to like make an indie right out of film school. I think that's awesome and magical. For me, that's not what it was. I went to school for screenwriting, to an art school, the University of the Arts, where they had a screenwriting program. And then out of school, I was like, we were all kind of like, okay, now what do we do with our screenwriting degrees?
Yeah.
So I moved to LA and I just needed to get a job to like make money. And I had done an internship. I mentioned FearNet. I did an internship there. So I was able to, they knew me, I was able to apply for a job. And then I got a marketing job. So I learned all about marketing, specifically for horror. And then a couple years later, I moved to New York. And interestingly, it was when I moved to New York that I started working for a production company. When I lived in LA, I did not work for a production company, but in New York, I worked for a production company called Glass Eye Pix, which is an indie horror production company run by Larry Fessenden. And I'd been a big fan of the movies that they were making, like House of the Devil and The Innkeepers and Stakeland. And Larry's movie Habit was like one of my favorite movies. And I got to meet him and producer Peter Polk, and I told them I wanted to work for them and I wanted to learn how to produce, and eventually I wanted to learn how to direct, and they brought me on. And I got to, you know, over the time that I worked there, which was about 7 years, produced a bunch of films for the company. And it was really like, that was my film school, because I don't feel like I really learned how to make movies when I was in college. That was more focused on screenwriting. But working at Glass Eye Pix was my film school, and I produced these films, but I had these seasoned producers to go to if I ran into anything. They were totally watching my back and you know, making sure, like overseeing, making sure everything was going overall according to plan. And I was really able to like dive in to producing and learn how to produce, how to support the director's vision, how like everything from paperwork to location scouting to delivering a film, all of it. And I had made some short films as well as a director, but they were very short, like 3-minute shorts. And then eventually, once I felt like I had all this experience under my belt, I was like, okay, now I feel ready to direct a feature. And that led to The Ranger.
That's amazing. I mean, I feel like having that background in producing would be totally invaluable. Like just knowing how a set runs and knowing the way that just kind of the behind the scenes aspects of filmmaking work seems incredibly
It,
useful.
it was it was so awesome. But I really did feel like I felt that I had to know all that
Mm.
before I would be ready to direct. Um, then when I directed The Ranger, I discovered, oh, there's an entire world of directing I now need to learn. There's an entire world of craft. Like, yes, I, I understand how a set works from producing these movies, and but now I'm learning, you know, the nuances of talking to actors and how best to talk to department heads, and you know how much communication is necessary when you're directing. It's like all communication. You have to constantly be communicating in all the different ways that one can communicate, you know, obviously through talking things out, but also through creating lookbooks and music playlists and you know, sizzle reels, or like, or references. Oh, I want this shot to be like, you know, here's an idea for how we can accomplish this shot, and like going to a scene from random movie from the 70s or whatever. um and I just find all of it so fun. So getting to like really dive into it, because you know, when you're making shorts, at least on the level I was making shorts, which were for like no money, like $300 and a couple of my friends, you're spending more time when you're making those kinds of shorts, you're spending more time doing the producing than the directing. You're trying to make sure everyone is where they need to be. You're like making sure there's pizza or whatever for people to eat. So I found that I actually wasn't doing much directing on those shorts. I was kind of like instinctively, I was directing, but I wasn't intentionally directing because I was too busy producing. So with The Ranger, it was actually my first opportunity to get to fully focus. I had producers, they were focusing on all of that, and I got to fully dive into directing, and I got to fully discover the magic of directing. And now I'm addicted and I don't want to stop. I want to keep going.
Okay, so I have to ask you about this playlist thing because I read that you do this. You make individual playlists for all your actors, and it was like, what?
Yes.
So tell me about this. I mean, I know music is a huge influence for you, but I want to know how this came about. What gave you the idea to do this? How it's received by your actors? Like how you do it? Tell me about it.
So when I'm like writing a film, when I'm in prep for the film, and these are like long, so far, like The Ranger, we started writing in 2014 and we shot in 2016. Sacrifice Game, the first draft was written in 2013. Then I put it aside and made The Ranger, and then started writing again in 2018, and then we shot in 2022. So these are long periods of time. Um, and I like to create a playlist for myself for each project so that I can easily tap into the vibes of the movie. You know, I might feel like stuck in terms of writing or whatever, and then I put on that playlist and I'm like, okay, I remember the vibes and the atmosphere and everything sonically. So then when I was prepping for The Ranger, it only made sense that I start compiling, like taking, so I have these giant playlists that are years in the making, and then I start picking out, oh, this is a Chelsea song, this is a Chelsea song, this is a Chelsea song, and this is a Ranger song, this is a Ranger song. And sometimes like these songs have really helped me crack characters. Like for the Ranger character, the song A Perfect Day by Lou Reed like totally opened up that character for me. I was like, oh, he's obsessed with her and he keeps thinking back to this like perfect day that they had when she was a child and he's an adult, and it's also very creepy. And you find those songs that then, you know, you're playing them on repeat as you're writing. So I create the playlist for the actors and I hand it off as just another tool, and they can, I always tell them, like, they can listen to it once and throw it away. They cannot listen to it at all. That's fine. It's really like every actor has their own individual process. So it's how much they want to engage with it. So some people are super into it. Some people say thanks and then we don't talk about it anymore, and that's fine. Some actors make their own playlists. Some actors share those playlists with me. Sometimes I steal those songs and put them onto my playlist. It's just, music is so powerful and it taps into so many like primal emotions. So it's another way to like play with your brain and get into the world of the movie, in addition to things like lookbooks and, you know, rehearsals with actors and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense. It literally never would have occurred to me, but so much of the job of a director is to like hold the tone and like hold the vibe of the movie. And so music is like such an obvious way to just tap into that really quickly. That's
It's
genius.
also fun, like when you're working with another writer, if I'm directing and I'm working with another writer, it's, you might not actually get the song, but it's a fun way to communicate, as you say, the tone of like, oh, this sequence should feel like this with a song like this in it. And then suddenly everyone's like speaking the same language and making the same movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also make lookbooks for your department heads, right?
Yes. And I love making lookbooks. I find so much joy and fun in it because all this work is only prepping you better for set. All this work is only like helping you solidify your vision for the movie. Um, so I mean, I could spend like hours and hours on Pinterest just gathering images, and then I enjoy designing how, because you could have a bunch of images, but that's only part of it. And the other part is like, well, what is the story that you're telling with the images, and how does one image lead to the next image? And you know, how do you find irony in an image over here? Well, you put, you know, a different kind of juxtaposing image over here. So I like to create stories if I can with the lookbooks as well, and with the images. And again, it's just another tool to communicate.
Well, it seems that your work is very image based. Like I was just thinking about the juxtaposition of the two dinner table sequences in Sacrifice Game. Like the way that you've created almost like a tableau in both instances, but really shifted them to create like a really clear message for the audience that something has changed. Um, it seems like the construction of images is really important to you.
Yeah, and I really enjoy thinking about arcs,
Mhm.
like visual arcs throughout a movie. And I really love, in terms of writing, but also directing, I love setups and payoffs so much. When I'm writing, I'm like constantly thinking of setups and payoffs. Um, and and you know, what are visual setups and payoffs? And visually, like, whose perspective are we in this scene, who are we supposed to be identifying with in this scene, and then how do you twist that later based on the story. So if you set something up in a certain way and then you pay it off in a different way, it can feel so satisfying. And in terms of that dining room scene specifically, I had well, first of all, that dining room I feel like came from my brain, like just the room. It was in the Abbey, and I was like, oh my god, this is the dining room, and like color wise, it was perfect. It was like everything that I dreamed of when writing it, and we're actually in there 4 times, but 2 of them I'll count as one, as a joint time, which is we're in there twice with just our girls as they're like preparing for their Christmas Eve dinner. And we're kind of like leaning into more like conventional traditional female roles. And they're talking about boys like, oh, it's like Prince Charming, like very romantic. And then we're in there with the gang when the gang's in charge. And for that, I wanted like the camera to feel like it was a shark and it's like circling our table, and you're not exactly sure when it's gonna attack. And then we're there again at the end, and with that, the camera is very static on each of the characters because I wanted it to feel like they're just like staring at their fate and they're unable to escape it. So like finding that kind of language is so fun to me.
Yeah, and it seems like also color is a really important component for you. Like in the Ranger, it's its own character, but then in Sacrifice Game as well, it really comes through. Um, how do you decide on a color palette for movies, and how do you figure out like where to use color in a story?
I think it comes instinctively as I'm writing it or as I'm prepping the script, if somebody else has written it. It's just part of the overall aesthetic, and it's part of uh I like to think about it in terms of arcs, like color. What is the color arc for the movie? And how do we tell the story through color? How do we talk about the themes of it through color? So with the Sacrifice Game, um, I really wanted to start off with the school feeling very like heavenly and kind of perfect, like a dollhouse. So lots of like blues in there and whites and making it feel very clean. And then meanwhile with the gang, they're in a world of Christmas color because we're like playing with Christmas and twisting, the expectations around Christmas. And then, when the gang gets to the school over the course of the movie, I wanted it to feel like we were going from this very like heavenly place, and we were slowly descending into hell. So then it was really important to me that there be a fireplace in the parlor, and that we have candles when we're getting into the third act in the dining room. And there was not a fireplace in this room, but our art team built a fireplace, and our special effects team like made it so that it would light up with real fire. And they're awesome. Like those teams were so incredible, and they built a fireplace in that space. And
That's
yeah.
amazing. I would have never known ever.
Hey, well,
So
movie
cool.
magic. But
Yeah.
they made my fireplace dreams come true because I loved the room. The room was so incredible, but I was like, we need the fireplace. Like the story, I felt the story wouldn't work unless we had a fireplace in that room.
Wow.
And then they made it happen. Yeah.
That's awesome. And okay, you've got to tell me about this sigil making class in Brooklyn.
Yeah. So it was over Zoom because it was during COVID when I made the sigil. Um, and we wrote, there's a demonic sigil in the script. So you can write that, but when you're starting to prep your movie, at some point you have to figure out what does this sigil look like. So I took this sigil creation class over Zoom, and I learned that you write out like a message or a hope, something that you want to happen, your spell, so to speak. You write it out, and then you like combine the letters so that it kind of loses meaning and instead becomes a symbol. So I did that. I can't share what I wrote because it's secret and has secret powers associated with it. But it is intrinsic to the movie, and now the sigil is, we're trying to spread the sigil, spreading the mark. Like it's Clara's sigil, and we want to spread it as far as we can. So we made temporary tattoos that we had at our premiere at Fantasia. I have a necklace. It's not in this room, but I have a necklace with the sigil that the producers made and they gave to the cast, and they gave me one when we wrapped. And we want to spread it far and wide.
That's amazing. That's so cool. What's kind of your hope for like the next phase of your directing? Like what's something you want to work on or haven't gotten a chance to do that you really want to try? Or what's the thing that's kind of driving you into the next project?
I want to keep exploring horror and exploring subgenres and mashing up subgenres in new ways. I want to make something really scary.
Mm.
I want to I want to keep exploring like complicated female characters. Been thinking a lot about the idea of the likable female character and how I would so much rather create unlikable but complicated female characters, and how I think I actually identify much more with those kinds of characters than with what we call likable, strong female characters. And yeah, we will have to see. I'm not quite sure what the next movie is yet, uh but we'll see.
Okay, last question. So the theme of our first issue is possessions. So do you have a favorite possession movie?
Oh my gosh, hold on, let me think. Well, Possession, the
Yes,
movie Possession
of
is
course.
incredible. Um, can I give you multiple?
Please,
Or
yes.
okay. Obviously The Exorcist. Um, let's think, let's think. I just saw Talk to Me. Thought that was
Oh yeah,
great.
I'm excited to
Talk
see
to
it.
Me was, yeah, great possession movie. Um, I'll leave you with those for now.
Okay, sounds good. I mean, possession, talk about like the ultimate amazing, unlikable female character.
Absolutely. And yet you love her.
Yes, of
And
course,
yet
because
you totally love her.
unlikable women are the ones who are relatable, I think.
Yeah, because people relate with complicated, fucked up characters. When we're talking about male characters, the male characters we relate with are complicated and fucked up, like Tony Soprano and Walter White. Um, so what is exactly the difference? I don't know. Also, because literally, again, I'm mentioning The Craft. It's because I watched it 2 days ago. Rewatched it 2 days ago. They're all they're all like dealing with stuff and ugly parts of themselves. Some actually physically ugly parts of themselves, like the girl Neve Campbell's dealing with scarring. Um, uh, but like those are they're like nuanced and complicated characters, and I don't know. I think people relate with them. Like I think all people relate with those characters. So anyway,
Yeah.
more
And
of that.
I'm excited for you to tackle that. That sounds really fun. And I feel like you're already doing it. So it's great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ariel. This was so fun.